Dialogues Global Politics. I'm Anita, and I'm here with my co-host, Ryan.
Thanks, and glad to be back.
In this episode, I speak with Lieutenant Colonel Alex Montgomery and Lieutenant Colonel Shannon Waller, students in my Autonomous Systems and Robotics industry study, about how these technologies are changing how wars are fought. They also share insights about the industry in South Korea and what the U.S. can learn from the Korean experience. But first, we begin with a discussion of the latest events between Israel, the U.S., and Iran in what Trump has dubbed the 12-Day War. What did Israel and the U.S. accomplish with their airstrikes, and how will it affect Iran's future? Well, we've kind of had a busy month.
Yeah, I'm exhausted. I don't know about you, but
Yes, I am.
yeah.
So we've been moving. We moved out of the condo we'd been renting to a house that we're now renting.
Yeah, lots of fun in the DC housing market as usual. Yeah, you know what? As many times as we've moved since we've been married, I think every time I forget like how exhausting it is, or I'm getting older and it's just more exhausting each time. I'm not sure which is which.
I never forget. It's always terrible. But this was an exceptionally terrible move.
It's pretty terrible. I had a good start, but then we got to the new place and disaster ensued.
None of our bedroom furniture, none of it, could fit upstairs.
Yeah, you got like your jewelry case off.
Yeah, a small jewelry case, which they broke the leg of.
Yeah, they managed to break that. Yeah. So yeah, we have all our bedroom all the bed stuffs in the basement, and then the dressers are down here. Yeah,
with all our clothes and stuff. So that's yes.
Yeah, it's convenient.
And we've been having to like build furniture. Like we built a bed so we could not sleep on the floor.
Yep. You say we.
Okay, that's true.
I built the furniture. Yeah, it was it's kind of like Legos for adults. It's very much kind of the IKEA type setup, not IKEA specifically. But the bed, that was a cinch, no problem. I thought it was bad at the time, but then your vanity, that was a nightmare. It was literally like 200 different pieces and 200 different screws, and that basically took all day to put together. All while I was sweating it out, because the other thing was our HVAC, our air conditioning was not working. So fortunately, we got that resolved before this giant heat wave that's impacted half of the country hit this week.
The upstairs are still warm.
Upstairs are still warm. But we had like window units that kept the bedrooms at least semi-comfortable.
Yeah.
Although struggle because, I don't think it can take that outside air and cool it down that effectively when it's 90 plus out.
So fun times.
Fun times. That's right. But all of this, in terms of your stress relief, fortunately, you had another big game come out.
Yes, fortunately, because I need some escapists.
That's right.
So basically, it's Death Stranding 2. When you first told me about the first game, about this guy who walks around with a baby on his chest, I thought it sounded
delivers packages,
delivers packages. I thought it was the weirdest sounding game ever, but I loved it. And I've been really hyped for the sequel. I even got early access to it so I could start playing it a couple days early. And it's been fun. The baby grew up and then the baby got killed. So it was really sad.
I still can't believe that. I can't believe that was always like one of those thresholds you don't cross. Like you don't kill a baby in a movie or was it at least off screen? Or did they show that?
No, they didn't show.
Okay. There's some taboo thing still.
But it started out so sad. It's more emotional than the first one, for sure.
Yeah.
It's all about these consequences of the first one.
Kind of like Last of Us. Isn't it kind of following that storyline? Like consequences, that must be a popular.
Yeah. So, it has a very similar formula. You're still delivering packages, this time in Australia. It's complicated how it ends up in Australia. You're connecting the continent.
So you're doing the same thing that you did in the first game.
You're doing exactly the same thing.
You're starting off. Where are you starting off on the, like in Sydney?
You have
and then working your way to Perth or what?
No, you start out, like they don't have like corresponding cities anymore. They're always like Fort something or Port something.
Okay.
So you start out on the West Coast.
You start off near Perth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So it's funny because in Mexico, it only takes 3 connections to link up the entire country of Mexico. But in Australia, like each little connection only lights up because you're trying to install the internet.
Right. Yeah.
Something similar. And yeah, it takes a lot more stations. It only lights up a little part of Australia. So I thought that was funny.
They gotta make it last. I mean, that's how the first game worked too. It would just light up a little part of the U.S. or
yeah, I think this lights up even a
people
more
actually
little
live
part.
in every part of the U.S. unlike Australia.
Yeah. We haven't got to Central Australia yet, so I don't know how that's going to work.
There's nothing there. It's horrible desert. Is it desert? Or is the geography funky like it was in the first game?
No, it's desert.
It's desert. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
And I don't know, you already had your first bushfire and that was fun. Not really, but same kind of boss fights.
All the scary animals are dead in this post-apocalyptic world?
No, it's interesting. You have new scary animals that attack you.
Did kangaroos survive?
Kangaroos do survive because you capture a kangaroo for some experiment that's going on.
Oh, okay. Well, that's sad.
And they look like tarantulas. And those were the things that had just emerged out of this new world that attack you.
Yeah.
So they keep it weird. I felt like the first one was a little weirder just because you had to get used to having this baby in a pod on your chest. And you needed that to see certain monsters in the world. And now you have a puppet. Somebody's soul is stuck in a puppet.
Oh, okay.
You carry him
That's
around
creepy.
with you.
Yeah.
And he kind of acts like a drone almost because you can throw him up in the air and he'll provide aerial view.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I saw, I don't know if was it the load screen or something, and there's a bunch of weird stuff going on because it had like every character in there, including the act. I mean, of course, the famous actor that played Daryl in Walking Dead, who, I can never remember the creator, Kirajima? No.
Yeah, Kojima.
Who's very fond of this actor. But anyway, you had that, and you had like this little doll looking thing. I was like, that's weird. So that's that's the little guy that travels around with you. Okay.
Yeah. The reports were that he was changed some things because it tested too positively and he wants it to be controversial, but
tested too positively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't really know how that works, but anyway, so it's been nice to have an escape with all of this.
Yeah. Good for your mental health break.
Necessary. Yeah. Well, we can get on to this 12-day war and what's going on with Iran.
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously we were a little personally distracted, but obviously major geopolitical news that's dominated the headlines over the last couple of weeks. Israel launched a major offensive against Iran beginning on June 13th. Where they had a wide coordinated attack on Iran's nuclear facilities, its ballistic missiles, its military leadership, basically everything that Israel saw as Iran's offensive ability to threaten the security of the Israeli state. What was so extraordinary, kind of similar to what we saw, but at a much larger scale than what they did against the Hezbollah leadership, of course, was the pager attacks, but this massive coordinated response within the first couple of hours of the offensive. The first part was they actually named Operation Red Wedding, which I think we all remember from Game of Thrones as a pretty shocking decapitation of the entire, I can't remember the name of the family within Game of Thrones, but this was
Stark family.
Was it the Stark family? Yeah, it was, of course, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was a simultaneous elimination of basically the top 30 military commanders within Iran, including the chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guard. So just an extraordinary coup in terms of, one, targeting a lot of them in a central location when they were meeting, and then carrying out the strike unimpeded. And then at the same time, they knocked out 9 of the senior nuclear scientists heading up Iran's program. All of this apparently was planned back in April when IDF and Mossad assessment of Iran is that they were accelerating the development of its nuclear weapon program and essentially determined that Iran would be capable of producing a bomb within a few months, which, was a controversial, definitely disagreed with the U.S. assessment. Famously, Tulsi Gabbard testified in front of Congress in March saying that the Iranians were not pursuing a nuclear weapon at the time. Trump, as we'll discuss later, chose not to follow the guidance of his national intelligence, but followed the Israeli assessment instead. The other things driving it were the Israelis believed that Iran was also increasing its ballistic missile capacity from a stockpile of roughly 2,000 to nearly 9,000. It would be able to do that within a couple of years. And, essentially there was this opportunity created. I mean, we talked about in previous podcasts about what extraordinary weak position Iran was in, and that they definitely had created an environment where something like this strike on their nuclear capabilities was pretty ripe, because all of their proxies in the region had been disassembled or fell apart between Hezbollah, between Hamas, and then the Syrian regime collapsing. The only proxy still kind of in the battle was the Houthis in Yemen, and even they had have a limited offensive capability. So between all of that, this created this window of opportunity that the IDF and the Netanyahu administration saw as like too good to pass up.
Yeah, and then you had a period of will he, won't he, Trump, will he join this war?
Right.
And Trump is kind of noted for his isolationism, and we've talked about this a lot. He talks tough on Iran, but would he actually get the U.S. involved in any sort of conflict, with his tendency to want to avoid conflict, particularly getting the U.S. into another war in the Middle East? So he did. To some surprise, the Hawks actually won the battle, even though it seems usually closer to Trump's ears are the isolationists, but the Hawks won. And the Trump administration was convinced to authorize strikes on the underground nuclear facilities using B-2 bombers to deliver 14 bunker-busting bombs, the GBU-57. Now, you told me that there's only 20 of them in existence.
There's only 20 in the entire inventory, and we've used up 14 of them. So do the math. We just have 6 left.
That's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I would say that deals into problems of the defense industrial base supply chains and the ability to produce enough weapons or replenish weapons, because who knows how long it will take to build more bombs.
Yeah, no, I have no idea. I mean, obviously, these are very specialized weapons, but in an extended conflict or in a conflict where you're targeting leadership or heavily fortified facilities like these were, you would definitely run into an issue in terms of a limited capacity at this point.
Yeah, so the assessment of the damage has been controversial. So IDF believes the nuclear program was significantly damaged, and ability to enrich uranium to 90% has been neutralized for an extended period. 90%, of course, is what you need to enrich it to have a nuclear weapon grade. Right now, their uranium is enriched to 60%. The DIA U.S. initial assessment was more skeptical, saying that it was only set back by months, not years, and that the centrifuges were largely intact, and most of Iran's enriched uranium had been moved before the attacks. But there are more assessments have argued for that there was more extensive damage, loss of 20,000 centrifuges. It's unsure how much of the 880 pounds of enriched uranium stockpile still exist. So basically, no one knows for sure how damaging this was or not.
Yeah, and I think it does seem like it's while they acknowledge that the initial assessments that, of course, Trump blew a fuse about, and Hegseth was searching down the potential leakers of that information to the press, because this was, I think, joint reported both by CNN and the New York Times, the initial assessment. It does seem like it was more successful than that, but I mean, it takes time, to get the on the ground intelligence to know exactly. And then, you just have so much uncertainty, particularly around the enriched uranium. I think that's the one where there've been enough reports that there were trucks moving in and out of these facilities prior to the strike, that the thought is that because you could transport some of this enriched uranium, just like in a vehicle, that the Iranians would have naturally kind of scattered the stockpile throughout the country. Other theories think that it is now buried deep underground, but because it's in containers, they could, in theory, extract it. So that's led to some where in the Foreign Affairs article that will provide a link to, where would the U.S. then, if there's excavation equipment around these sites, would it conduct another strike to discourage the Iranian regime from trying to dig up out of the rubble any of this enriched uranium?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I think it's clear sort of the perspective that Israel has and the actions Israel is willing to take on Iran. It's still more confusing. The U.S., what they see is their possible range of options. Like you said, would they attack Iran if they attempted to excavate, some of this? In one way, it's sort of this triumph of those in the U.S. who wanted to see more aggressive action on Iran, and this idea that we can claim victory with just airstrikes and not have to get our hands and feet dirty by being on the ground, which is something we definitely would avoid doing in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, it's been real interesting seeing the dynamic, because there was, when the airstrike occurred, was this the beginning of an attempt of regime change? You certainly got that notion from the Israelis, who I think there were reports coming out that they did want to target Khomeini, so the Ayatollah, religious leader in charge of Iran, but they just didn't get the opportunity. And even Trump, again, facilitating back and forth, hints at, he'd be open to regime change. But ultimately, what stood out was, he declared preemptive victory and there should be a ceasefire. And after a short period where Trump got real mad and dropped the F-bomb,
because they were still striking each other.
Yeah, because they were still, both Iran and Israel were still launching attacks. And of course, we failed to mention Iran did do a symbolic attack against the airbase, U.S. airbase in Qatar. Again, purely symbolic, very similar to their response when Soleimani was targeted and killed in Iraq during Trump's first term. They let the Qataris know that they were going to carry out the strike, so the base was evacuated, and then every missile essentially was intercepted as well.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think when we're looking at, we wondered what the Iranian response would be to the U.S. involvement. A lot of it depends on how the regime views its survivability. If the regime views that it can still survive this, then it's not going to want to provoke a fight with the United States, which is certainly going to lose. But if it feels like it is at an existential threat, that it will lose if they don't strike back at the U.S., then that's when you could see some real damage on the part from Iran if they just went full out. And again, they're going to lose. But if you're going to lose, it's just a lot of stuff in the literature shows that regimes are very dangerous when it looks like they are going to lose power, because that's when they will take on. And even though they lose, they can create a lot of damage.
Yeah, and I think that's what you really haven't seen any visible sign of, and the Iranian regime has been, good at preventing sort of capable opposition party or splits, I think in particular within the military, so within the Revolutionary Guard, so that it doesn't seem to be a threat to that survivability. Although one has to think that their legitimacy, a big part of their legitimacy is to provide security to its citizens, to beat back its enemies, the U.S. and Israel. And this has, I don't know how you can spin state propaganda where Tehran's having to be evacuated, where Tehran's being bombed at will, where Iran's military commanders and scientists who are viewed as heroes, I mean, they're held up by the government as national heroes, are at will executed, how that doesn't erode the legitimacy of the state, even if there's nobody to actively challenge that legitimacy.
I think the big thing is there's no one actively to challenge it. No. And you even saw somewhat of a rally around the flag effect, where there's sort of unity against being attacked by Israel and the United States.
Yeah. If they have any capability left in terms of centrifuges, in terms of the ability to process whatever enriched uranium they were able to escape. I definitely agree with the assertion is they were probably conflicted before. They didn't execute like the full fatwa of we're going to build a nuclear weapon and kind of make that a national mission.
Because they saw that making them a target for exactly these kind of strikes.
Now they have absolutely to do a absolute sprint in order to test a nuclear weapon. The whole messing, we talked about it before. I mean, nobody messes with North Korea. And I don't really like that analog because people weren't messing with North Korea either because they had enough conventional force that could light up all of Seoul. I don't think a nuclear weapon was necessarily the only deterrent, but it certainly created a condition where every nation should know that the only way to create deterrence is to have the bomb.
And I think one of the lessons that the world got, or these regimes that fell under attack got from Libya, is that the international regime convinced Libya, Gaddafi, to give up the nuclear weapons. He did, and then he got attacked. The regime
He had a worse fate than Saddam. Yeah, because he did it because he saw the fate of Saddam. He saw the invasion. He saw him being captured. I don't think he had been hung yet. No, I think he had been hung at that point. So he's like, I don't want to have that fate. And yet he did all that. He was complied and still ended up in a much worse situation in death. Same was argued with Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1994. Yeah, look what that led to for Ukraine.
Yeah. So I think those are the lessons that regimes like Iran take. And I agree with you that they may be more incentivized to actually build a nuclear weapon now because the type of attacks that they were trying to avoid have already happened.
Yeah, and they're just in such a position of weakness, even if domestically they've kind of rallied around the flag, but we don't know like the long-term implications of the weakness that they've demonstrated. And they can no longer project any sort of offensive power against Israel because of the loss of their proxy network over time. So yeah, it just seems, I think then with that in mind, that the other points that have been brought up is, we have a lot less tools to keep Iran from breaking out beyond the military one. Because, obviously diplomatically, why should they trust the U.S. anymore going forward? Apparently this was all a ruse in our negotiation with them in the first place to buy Israel more time. That's kind of how Trump has framed the ongoing negotiations between the two.
Oh, that's problematic.
And then Iran has officially banned the IEA from entering the country. And, it wasn't a perfect, obviously, inspection, but it was an important source of intelligence around the nuclear program. So I think ultimately, at the end of the day, and this was made in the Foreign Affairs article, is that we'll be highly reliant on Mossad, essentially, for all intelligence around the nuclear program, which obviously Mossad has deeply penetrated almost every aspect of Iranian national security. The article brought up the point of there'll be a counterintelligence push, but if there wasn't a counterintelligence push following October 7th and then kind of what they did in the earlier strikes, I don't know if Iran's capable of countering Israeli intelligence and how badly it's compromised their national security.
Yeah. And I think, we also have to think about what lesson that other countries, regimes that are not favorable to the United States, what lessons they may be taking from this. And of course, Trumpian would spin this they know to be afraid of the US or something. But the problem with using negotiations as a ruse and just can make it much harder to deal with these regimes in the future.
Well, it certainly pushes forward nuclear proliferation beyond everything. And you just have to encounter it. You become increasingly less reliant on diplomacy in the State Department, all the kind of the soft power means. You have to become reliant on intelligence and defense as a way to counter, so that you don't have a situation like North Korea aiding Pakistan and the construction of its nuclear program. There's certainly an incentive now for every rogue regime that has a beef with the U.S. to build a nuclear weapon.
Yeah. There are definitely consequences that you have to look down the line to fully understand the situation. But overall, I mean, it seems, I would say, more of a success than not, but we don't know how much. I mean, if Iran then ends up getting a nuclear bomb because they accelerated it, then I guess what I'm saying, and as I'm thinking out loud, is that we don't know if this was a good operation or not, that this was a good action to take or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think everything I've read is, they are severely downgraded. That being said, I mean, this is a big country of 90 million people, has a very sophisticated government and constitutional system and depth in terms of it's hard to decapitate it. And even with the nuclear scientists that they've taken out, I mean, these are a highly educated society with all the sort of things that any sort of lab here would have in terms of documentation. And so even if you're taking out some top people, it's not like they're doing the bulk of the work or that isn't spread out over the country. So it's a real question of, did you take out enough physical material and equipment to downgrade Iran enough that it couldn't produce a single nuclear weapon? I don't know, but that's kind of what it comes down to. Because if they have enough for 2 nuclear weapons, one to test and one to have, then I would put this potentially as a failure.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we won't really be able to assess for a long time, probably.
Yep.
But an interesting shift in Trumpian foreign policy to away from pure isolationism.
No, I think it is interesting, but I think it was also a balance in a way, because it was just this one and done strike, like this bold action that was done, and then a immediate commitment to not fight anymore.
Yeah, it's true. One thing also notable is that, China and Russia have not really intervened on Iran's behalf. With Russia, it's interesting because Russia's really relied on like Iranian drones and some of its technology, but obviously has its hands full and may not be capable. But China's absence from mediating, negotiating, supporting Iran in any way, tangible way, is kind of notable when we think of reports of China's growing role in the Middle East. On the other hand, Iran did send its defense minister to China in the last couple of days. So that's kind of an interesting development. Obviously, they're hoping China will provide help of some kind.
Yeah, but I think it's shown China to be a pretty hollow tiger in there for all of the kind of hype around its, negotiating a more normalized relationship between Saudi Arabia and Iran like a year ago, that in reality, it's a hollow transactional power. And the entire idea of kind of this new axis of evil, too, of this network of cooperation and alliance between Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea is equally hollow compared to the coordination that obviously exists with like NATO allies and between Israel and the US. So overall, I mean, I could definitely see the Trump administration legitimately spinning this as a victory. Obviously, Netanyahu and kind of his own political situation and trying to buttress kind of the unpopularity of the Gaza campaign, which is even in Israel very controversial and unpopular. And obviously the intelligence failures of the October 7th. Because of the last year and the stunning victories delivered by the IDF, that he's really looking at cementing his legacy and making him like politically immune from any prosecution when he does eventually leave office.
I think it's also helped him to avoid actually being present at trials that are ongoing, right? So they don't wait for the president to leave office to try him. He's under, I think, corruption. I don't know. There's some trial going on with Netanyahu.
Yeah.
That he's been able to say, look, this is a national emergency and a president can't show up during a national emergency, which is considered a legitimate excuse. So
yeah, it does kind of give it incentive to continue continue the campaign, but
see how that works itself out.
Yeah.
All right. So for our next topic is my interview on the autonomous systems and robotics industry. That's something that I definitely have referenced previously on this podcast. It was what we do in the spring, as I've said before too, where we meet with leaders of industry, academia, and government to get a really in-depth look of what the most recent developments are in a particular industry. I think it's one of the greatest parts of this program and is a really unique experience that you can't find anywhere else, particularly because this industry is at the forefront of how we're fighting wars now. Of course, everyone thinks of drones in Ukraine, and then even the drone strike that Israel launched from within Iran too. What is the technology behind that? Where is it leading? How is the U.S. thinking about using autonomous systems going forward in the future? I think there's a lot of questions to ask, and not that there are answers, but I think these two students, their perspectives help provide what the current industry looks like as it is. Well, here's the interview. Welcome to Kellogg's Global Politics, a podcast on current events in U.S. foreign policy and international affairs. My name is Anita Kellogg. I'm here with Alex Montgomery and Shannon Waller to discuss the autonomous systems and robotics industry. Alex is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army, and Shannon is a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Marine Corps. Both Alex and Shannon recently wrapped up their study of the autonomous systems and robotics industry at the Eisenhower School of the National Defense University. During the program, they met with industry leaders and other key figures to gain a comprehensive understanding of the challenges and opportunities this industry faces. So hi, Alex and Shannon. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Hi, thanks for
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join you on your podcast today.
Oh, I'm so happy to have you guys here. So just to kind of get into it, how would you describe the autonomous systems and robotics industry? What all does it encompass?
Yeah, so I'll start. I think the autonomous systems and robotics, or AS&R industry, encompasses multiple industries, but they're really focused on combining machines or hardware platforms of some sort with software, often using artificial intelligence or AI, so that that machine can operate independently or semi-independently. And then these systems or vehicles kind of mirror and extend human capabilities as we've learned across the three domains. And so that's land, sea, or air. And each of these machines kind of have what I would say is four different components. So they have some form of ability to sense and analyze the environment around them. So a sensing component. They have a perception and kind of decision-making component, so they can interpret the data or the analysis that they're getting from the environment and then kind of make a decision using that new cool AI or software. Then there's a control mechanism that kind of executes the actions based on that interpreted data. And then obviously some mobility or movement manipulation, where that platform physically interacts with the environment around it so that it can move and get away from obstacles. And so when we're, thinking from a wartime environment, probably the most popular system or platform that we're talking about in the AS&R space is a drone.
Great. So that's a good introduction to it. Can each of you name a couple of key takeaways from your study of the industry?
I think one of the biggest things when it comes to autonomous system robotics is that there's a wide range. I think we're going to get in maybe this a little later as well, but automation's been around for a long time. We think now it's all robots and AI, and that is kind of the extreme or the edge we're trying to get to, fully autonomous things. But it's a wide spectrum of automation, and where the human, I think, is one of the big takeaways, where the human is going to intervene, how the machine operates, whether it be warfare or driving a Waymo car or something like that. So it's if you try to kind of box this in, you're kind of missing the big picture of what the automation means, and it means different things to different industries. And as it goes along, it probably will continue. And some things will probably never be fully autonomous, just based on some of the constraints we could talk about as well. Also, I'd say it's a very challenging and expensive kind of area to get into. So when we talk about getting to certain places with private capital or it's government funding, it just takes a lot of investment to get it there. And so when you have a lot of people getting in there, if there's no coordination or synchronization, really developing and getting to where we want to go will require some cooperation in various levels of government, academia, industry, even foreign partners, et cetera, if we really want to accelerate automation itself.
Great. Alex?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway is a lot of the technological advances that we're seeing in these AI software systems combined with geopolitical factors. It's really changing the character of warfare, and it's responsible for driving significant growth in ASNR. And so there is a drive across defense industries, not just in the US, but globally, to get into that space, to get into ASNR so that they can use that in warfare or in preventing and deterring that in the future. But I think one of the biggest things that we learned kind of throughout is due mostly to the vulnerabilities in the supply chain and kind of some of the lack of the human capital or workforce. There really is kind of an inability here in the US to scale production specifically, but to scale production for a lot of these ASNR systems, not talking about 10, 20, but hundreds of thousands of systems that we would need. We're just not there. Now, maybe some of the primes have that capability, but are very unique, cool, new, high-tech firms don't necessarily have that capability to produce at the level that we would expect for the Department of Defense. And I also think for some of these high-tech firms, there is kind of an overinflated sense of autonomy, claims of, what drones can do in the EW space and what ground autonomy can do moving around obstacles. That combined with the lack of expertise broadly across the DoD of what, Shannon was talking about, what autonomy really means, the full scope of it. I think that creates risk for us. And there's a lot of leaders out there that really aren't pushing forward ASNR maybe as much as they could because of that lack of knowledge and some of that overinflation in autonomy claims.
Yeah, and your point about supply chains is a really interesting one and really relevant. So you mentioned drones earlier, and certainly when I mention this subject to family and friends, that's the first thing that comes up and how it has impacted the Ukraine war. And then many may also be familiar with the stunning Operation Spiderweb recently, the large-scale Ukrainian drone strike against air bases across Russia, primarily targeting Moscow's fleet of strategic bombers. Is the way wars are being fought changing? And if so, what products are coming out of this industry or are in development that are most likely to impact this change?
In reality, overall long range of new weapon systems, lethality, and just the overall weapons industry, what they've come out with, we have to decide that we want human standoff because the attrition wars you see in Ukraine is not real pretty. And Ukrainians who are defenders, they have that advantage, but they're much smaller size. So they've really been able to capitalize on their ability to harness their organic industrial base, if you will, the UGVs or unmanned ground vehicles or uncrewed ground vehicles, and then unmanned aerial vehicles to inflict a lot of damage or at least slow down the Russians. And the Russians have been countered with a lot of their own stuff, bringing in Iranian Shaheeds and things of that nature. So what you see is a lot of robot on robot or robots trying to find humans. And it's creating a lot of human standoff, which is a positive for humans, but it also creates this idea of you're going to have, as Alex said, you want tens or hundreds of thousands of drones, just a large scale of weaponry that is continuing to evolve. I saw a picture the other day of all the fiber optic cables laying over a wheat field in Ukraine because of all the Russian jamming. So now the Ukrainians have gone to fiber optic cables, and so has the Russians. So it's very interesting how it's normal course of warfare. Someone creates a weapon, they use it, someone finds a counter to it, they go back and forth. And ultimately, you have a cocktail of these weapons out there and just more and more advanced. And eventually, I guess some of them might have all these counter capabilities and be very, very lethal. I think until the AI part of it's really solved, and I think the operation you spoke of reportedly they smuggled the drones in and then launched them out of trucks, and a lot of them were jammed, but they just continued full autonomous. So we have, obviously there's some ethical considerations on everybody's side, but specifically for the U.S. and how you're going to fight that war, or are you ever going to unleash that, or are you going to constrain yourself against your adversary to a point? So I think it's really accelerating kind of the way you take a simple, large number of drones and use them, and then to what degree are you going to use them based on where you're at in warfare? Are you losing? Are you winning? Are you in an urban area? Are you in an open battlefield? So it raises a lot of questions that aren't necessarily new, but just in a different way to view them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Another topic that comes up is whether it will have a substantial impact on human labor. So in some countries with labor shortages like South Korea, this is one of the appeals of developing the robotics industry. In the US, however, there's more concern over dramatically reducing employment in a number of fields. How likely is this to happen in the next 10 years or so? And are people right to be worried?
Yeah, I'll take this one because I think it's a great question to look at the short-term and long-term impacts of automation and production, and to take the question a little bit further, how business is using large language models or LLMs in administrative jobs is also something to look at. Ultimately, economic incentives that drive the adoption of this automation specifically and the use of LLMs, I think is going to determine the labor impacts. But I don't see a drastic reduction in human labor requirements overall. I mean, whether we're looking 2 years out or 10 years out, what I see and what's in a lot of the literature out there is it's more of a shift in employment requirements than a reduction in employment opportunities. And so robots operating in the manufacturing space specifically are definitely going to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of production for those repetitive, talked about dangerous, dirty type of tasks. But it's always going to require skilled technicians to program these robots, to maintain the machines, to make sure that they're working to the utmost of their capability, because they are expensive machines. Even though they can continue to work for 24 hours, the amount of capital to get those machines on the line is really high right now. And so I think because of that, there's always going to be an opportunity for current employees that are working the line to maybe shift to a more specialized, skilled role where they're doing some of the programming of these robots or some of the maintenance, or they're advising, so to speak, but not necessarily getting rid of all of that labor. From an administrative perspective, looking at LLMs and how ChatGPT and Gemini and some of those others are going to work from an administrative aspect, I see them actually augmenting employees and managers, not replacing them. So we're doing things more efficiently. That kind of human machine collaboration is happening, so we get a more effective product down the line. But I don't think the long-term impact on the workforce is going to be a reduction in jobs. I think more of the fear is there is going to be change. And so our job market is going to have to shift a little bit and focus on what these robots and LLMs can do and what they can't do, and focus the job market on what they can't do and specialize in that area.
Yeah, I just want to push back just a little bit in that more efficiency usually means you need less people. And even if you are transferring some jobs to the more technical side of helping to maintain the robots and program the robots, it does seem like overall you wouldn't need as many of them as you need currently in the manufacturing line. So how would this not be a dramatic effect on employment?
And I think a lot of that is we figure out where it works for robots and where it doesn't. And so in our travels, we were able to see in this kind of extensive field study that there's certain very detailed electronic components that it may not matter how detailed this robot gets. Human hands and expertise are going to be the right way to go to make these very detailed electronic components. And so it will be more of a shift from what the robot can do to what the human can do. And as we continue to become more efficient, more effective, we're becoming, more high tech. There's better systems out there. So those high tech systems are going to require more refined, smaller, detailed, specific tasks that maybe it's human machine kind of teaming to get it done. But more than likely for the next 10 years, I think you're looking at humans are doing that very detailed, technical oriented work.
I think what Alex brought up at the beginning, the dirty jobs, that a lot of humans don't want to do those anymore. So that's the first area where we've substituted, I think, the drones inspecting pipelines or going into places that are dangerous for humans to be, that there's just not, people just don't do those anymore. So, and I think this follows the evolution of technology advancing. Employment and labor shifts to different industries. Take India, they have a large service telecommunications industry coming from a very agrarian society. They still grow food, but a lot of their employment is in medicine and service industries and things of that nature. So I think when we fill those in, now there's always the threat of, I think the crux of the question is, when you're dealing with the government, how do you not displace a bunch of workers just by businesses want to become more efficient? And then you have a significant unemployment problem, which is fair. But I think, again, we're starting at the areas where people don't want to fill in. And the South Korean model is exactly that. They know they have a birth rate decline, and so they're not going to have the number of workers they need. So they're immediately filling that in with robots and then applying that technology and expanding it through other ways to continue to help out their defense industry and other things. But it is an important question and something to wrestle with.
Right. I think that's great. And you make a really good point in that these dull, dangerous, dirty jobs, there's already like shortages there. And being able to have robots to be in a place that humans don't want to take those jobs anymore is a really good point. So we brought up South Korea, and the industry study spent a week there learning about their autonomous systems and robotics industry. So what are the couple of the key insights you gleaned from studying their industry?
I'll jump in first. And so I truly enjoyed the opportunity to visit with the defense firms specifically in South Korea, because their mentality about defense and actually many times how the South Koreans discuss that they're still at war with North Korea. So not being over there before, that didn't even cross my mind. And you have very high level executives talking about being at war. That really shifts the mentality and the focus on defense and allows them to make some clear decisions on policies and resources regulating how they do their defense production. So one of the key insights that I took away that I think our group really looked at was this idea of they have a national robotics strategy. Government, top driven, down, focus on robotics to, not just the defense industry, but get more robotics into industry overall. And they're backing that strategy with funding for universities, government agencies, trying to improve the workforce and all of that to foster innovation and economic growth that then goes into them being a more capable defense industrial base.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Alex hit on it. I've been over there about a half dozen times, different times in my career. And one thing is they're a home team and they're always prepared for the conflict. So they have to think about things differently. We're guarded by two oceans. So when they've incentivized their companies to make something, they really do a good job of partitioning. Like one company's going to make a howitzer, maybe another one's going to make a tank. And that's foreign to us, no pun intended, but we throw it out there and let a lot of people compete. And they kind of for the sake of efficiency and the necessity, they've kind of said different companies are going to be doing different things. We're going to give you the money up front to help you share in the burden, but we've got to get these things online. And then the fascinating thing on the backside is once they've developed it for Korea, then they say, hey, you're allowed to make more money. Now you go export it. And the South Koreans have become a chief exporter in military hardware around the world, specifically now more in the Middle East, which is a very fascinating model and something we may get into as well with our exports. But they just have a different mindset, I think, when it comes to it. Now, how they think of the machines may be the same, but the way they, on the front side, get to where they can develop and actually start producing and scaling their autonomous systems or anything in their defense industry is just it takes on that different characterization based on where they live, and their threat is connected directly to them by land to the north.
Yeah, I think that perspective has always struck me too when I've been in Korea, the sense of being at war or just having a different security, ever-present security challenge and how that affects things. Your point about it being very top-down, I wonder how much innovation then you get from the bottom up. Like most of the companies we saw were pretty big companies.
Yeah, Dr. Kellogg, you mentioned their ability to innovate and how it is. And this ties right in, I think, to how they're different is they're very much looking outward to the U.S. and other friendly nations to partner with them because they know, they're very engineered, very innovative. Mm-hmm. But because they're partitioned, you're right, to maybe overcome that, we have talked to numerous other companies. They were like, we want more, we want a better relationship, or we want easier way to get the U.S. over to help us develop things. And we've done that with the F-A-50 fighter. I think the F-35K obviously is an overall joint program. And now we're working in things with LIG Next 1 and some unmanned or uncrewed surface vessels paired with weapon systems of theirs. So they're looking for a way to harness our innovativeness as an ally to help, I think, overcome that. And I think that's a smart thing on their part. Whereas the U.S., I think we're a little less willing to, we're worried about IP and the security classification of the things that we organically come up with. So it's one of those obstacles that, and I think that's a bigger issue for maybe another podcast, is how do you, as the U.S., take that leap of faith and release more of your IP, et cetera, to try to get your foreign partners and trust them to make the overall system better. For right now, we largely try to do a lot of things on our own. And I think the Koreans are very smart and they know what they can do on their own. Large manned end items like tanks and howitzers that they have a tradition of, partition those off. And then all the new drones and things, I think multiple other companies are making those. They go, hey, we need a little more help. And because this is the next thing, but we don't necessarily have the capacity or necessarily the know-how and innovation right now, but we need it. And we want our partners to help us out.
Yeah, that's a really good point about collaboration between the countries, and also what the U.S. Would get out of that and sort of filling some of our gaps as well. So kind of moving back to what you were talking about, Shannon, about there's no automation versus non-automation, that you guys developed a 5-point scale of automation where 0 represents no and 5 is full automation. So what level of automation are most companies in the defense industrial base?
Well, I think I don't know if we adopted or made our own. We kind of used the SAE automation levels to kind of recommend that overall industry multi-domain, that the DoD come up with some kind of standardization. So if I'm using the SAE one, so I think we're somewhere living between generally 2 and 4, which would be partial automation, conditional automation, and high automation. So probably conditional automation. And basically, it right now we're kind of where a operator is a necessity, but it's not required all the time. So we can put in mission profiles for UAVs or any uncrewed vehicle, have it go out and do a certain mission set. But at some point, the humans got to be ready to take control, passing on additional instructions, et cetera. And a lot of that's because of to the right of that high automation, full automation, the more you bring in that edge compute, artificial intelligence, going back to what Alex was saying, is some of them are overstated and it takes a lot of investment. For example, reinforcement learning to get things where we could trust that machine can operate on its own. So I would say level 3, which is a pretty good space to be, but when you consider that our adversaries who maybe aren't fettered by ethical or moral limits are going to go full automation, and just what happens. So there is definitely some pressure to move, and it's the balance of how do you fund the right people doing the right thing to get it there. And with the U.S., we're very obviously open capitalistic market. We try and we fail a lot, but probably not as fast as we need to be. And we don't have and this goes to one of the challenges, the R&D and the scalability I know Alex spoke to earlier, to identify what are the real innovators who are doing it the right way and we can trust their thing, and what's their ability to make their product even better. Do that reinforcement learning, then we could get the trust up to where high automation or even full automation is real, something that we ethically, morally can put into the use specifically on the battlefield.
Yeah, so going off what you're saying, it seems like trust is maybe one of the chief obstacles to achieving full automation. Are there any other large obstacles that you see?
I think just to jump in, that really depends on the domain. So if we're talking land, sea, or aerial automation, as we saw in a congested land environment, the perception of really full automation or even into that 3 or 4 is maybe just not there yet. And so the main obstacle for a lot of it is software related, that the AI, the sensing, perception back and forth is just not connected in a way that decision making is as fast and focused as we need to be for some of those robotic wheeled or tracked vehicles. But from an aerial and underwater domain kind of perspective, they operate in less complex environments. And so I think you can get to higher automation quicker with less complex AI stacked on top of each other. The definition of a level 5 or full autonomy is the ability to operate in any environment. And so I think one of the chief obstacles there of a level 5 kind of fully autonomous vehicle is communication with that vehicle. And then as Shannon kind of pointed to, what is the user's comfort level with that platform's capability?
Yeah, and Shannon, you mentioned, the ethical considerations. So what are the implications of full automation with respect to both ethical and security concerns?
That's a tough one. The ethical one's the biggest thing. I think both the Russians and Ukrainians are doing full autonomy in the sense that, they have pretty big standoff in most areas unless they're attacking urban areas. So I think they have a fairly high confidence, if they care, that they're attacking valid military targets. But I think for us, in a lot of places we've fought wars in, that are congested, the heavy civilians and things like that, and misidentification. And so perfecting targeting is, and I know that there's this going on in the news with Gaza and the Israelis too, how they're using lavender to target and what's the acceptable confidence level before they're going to strike a target. And again, a little bit more existential, on their end, where maybe they can justify it, whether that meets the world's or our U.S. Level of comfort. I'm not sure that necessarily does or does not. I don't have the full read in on what they're exactly doing, but having seen strikes in those areas, you have to be very good. And there's a lot of things that blend in. And as we learned in our studies with a couple of things, there's ways to spoof artificial intelligence and targeting. And it's a real grave thing, especially warfighters, because I think people that are pulling the trigger or hitting the button or whatever you want to say to execute a strike, they want to know for their own selves. But I think almost to a person that their confidence in what they're doing is going to elicit the effect, or at least not harm civilians in the process of doing that to the utmost. So there's full automation. It's here. We can do it, but again, it's the confidence level of what you're going to do that, and that goes back to that reinforcement learning. We visited a firm that does specifically imaging for targeting, and they talk through how they run back through the images, and they allow their automation to pull. They use it in the part that Alex is talking about administratively, like, hey, we're going to narrow these things down from our surveillance scans, and anything we don't fully understand, we're going to flag it for human intervention. So that's not full, but it allows them to continue to refine that process and add to that data. Now, where that gets to perfect, well, again, there's always a counter for something. So the issue is, if someone figures out what we're doing or can figure out how to spoof it, then now we're going back into reinforcement learning again, and how do we over and over again. So it's going to be ongoing. So full automation is maybe a pinnacle we touch and then may get knocked down from it based on counters. And we're going to continue to wrestle with, I think, what we're comfortable with based on the situation. So it's not an easy question. It's definitely what a lot of folks are aiming towards, because if you can get that, that's the golden goose. If you can get there and prove that you can do it with trust, I think you're going to be a DoD customer for probably a long time in that regard.
From an ethical perspective, we may not want to get to full level 5 automation, instead push towards the tactic of man in the loop framework for all lethal, autonomous systems. There can be full automation for other systems, ISR, recon, that kind of stuff, because I just don't think we're at the point in society and with the Department of Defense where taking a human life should be an algorithm of ones and zeros. And I'm not sure that, because there still is kind of a lack of understanding of autonomy and what goes on inside, that we won't just push to a more man-in-the-loop tactic. But, as we talked about, there's increased risk to that, because anytime we want to communicate with an unmanned vehicle, we're delaying targeting actions, adding communication vulnerabilities, kind of into the mix. But, that was kind of what I was getting at with my last comment, that it's about comfort. How comfortable are we with the systems and what they can do? So I think if you're looking short term, it's definitely going to be a man-in-the-loop type of scenario, because I don't believe that comfort is there yet. But as Shannon talked about, once we get a little bit more comfortable with the AI stacked on, a lethal unmanned vehicle, maybe we do push in certain scenarios, specific targeting packages for a full level 5 autonomy where we are hands off.
I think Alex is right on there. And here's just to exponentially make it more complicated. When we're talking about one drone that's programmed to go strike one target, that's a complex problem in itself if you're going full autonomous. Now, the vision is, and it's the way we've operated in crewed vehicles of all domains, we're all data linked together. So I might have a drone go find a target that's backed up, Reaper per se, that's got an operator, a whole head cell behind it that's, yes, this is the target, and it's a good target. And then I have to find that target by some means in my F-18 and then confirm it, and then I'm going to strike it. Well, if we're talking about now pull humans out of all that, I have a autonomous targeting UAS that's going to find a target, and then it's going to hand off to we'll call it the killer, so a hunter-killer team, to another asset. And these assets may be made by different companies with different levels, I would say, trust. But now you're wrestling with the fact that now it's the information they're communicating. Is their own AI good enough to do full automation? And is the command and control system high fidelity? Then we trust that. So that it makes it infinitely more complex when you tie into that. And I think one of the main recommendations we came out of our study was the open systems architecture, where, okay, everybody can maintain their own IP, which is another topic of discussion in this field that limits innovation a lot of times. Is, okay, so we allow a common box to be put in, to be simplistic, and all these different things that makes them communicate. They're still going to be relying on their own AI, on their own systems and how good that is. And then they have to be able to communicate. So it's definitely a challenge if we want to get to the full networked autonomous level 5, that's I called it the pie in the sky, I think, in the brief. There's a long way to go. And Alex is exactly right. And we hit on this too. Human and machine teaming is the foreseeable future. At what point on that quotes automation scale, the human has to come in when the AI throws a flag up and say, I need a human intervene? There's a lot of efficiencies to potentially get to a target in the warfare sense, but we still need the human at some point to say, yes, this is good, or no, you can disregard that. Take it as a data point. We got to make this better and go from there. But yeah, fully networked machines is we're ways out from that, and being able to trust that in itself. And that's on top of just, hey, one drone going to strike a target with full AI. That's a big enough problem right now. I think that once we solve that, I think it'll create a exponential increase once somebody cracks the code on that and does it. They either may have a monopoly on AI in that sense, but it'll definitely increase the competitive nature and make us better. But we're just not, I don't see anybody there. I may not know everything, but I don't see anybody that's there yet that can do that with such a high level of confidence that we're going level 5 autonomy. So I wholeheartedly agree with what Alex just said.
Yeah. And so you lead into, I guess, one of my last questions, which is, what are your top 3 recommendations for improving the autonomous systems and robotics industry within the defense industrial base?
I'll go ahead and start and then pass it back to Shannon. So I talked about it earlier. I think the first thing is securing some of the vulnerabilities in the supply chain. And so a lot of these recommendations actually are from the class in general. And what we found is it's not just the direct supplier, but looking beyond the second tier and the third tier supplier to make sure that we're either able to secure those supplies in the US or through friends, allies, and partners, and not rely on other countries that may have the capability to shut off those supply chains or put those supply chains at risk. and to a point where we need to produce something at the thousands and hundreds of thousands. If we're unable to because of certain supplies or certain components, that's a significant risk. So I think one of those recommendations is figuring out how we secure that supply chain, whether that's onshoring, friendshoring, or just creating systems that don't have supplies reliant on other countries. Another one of those recommendations is just streamlining DoD acquisitions, classification requirements. As Shannon got to that a little bit, really to strengthen industry participation. So we have great innovative firms, and you brought up a great point and talked about kind of that bottom up innovation that maybe South Korea might not have because of that government kind of centralized push down. This private partner mix allows us to have great innovation, firms that are able to come up with just amazing ideas, but we have to incentivize them to want to be in the DoD space. We've got to be a better customer, whether we're changing how we do acquisitions, where we're streamlining it, whether it's a profit policy that we're changing, something so that we are an attractive partner for these small and large, very innovative firms to see the defense space as something that is not only great for our nation, but also great for their company.
Yeah, and I think that the incentive part is key there. Alex talked about and that's the difference in, say, like Republic of Korea. That's up front. The government says we're going to go in this. Our defense industry, regardless of the primes, but there's so many new venture capital startups and so many people saying they want this and want to get in the space. I think we have to have that incentive aspect of it. But I think we do a fairly good job now with DIU to say, here's our requirement. This is what we're looking for. Bring your product and make sure it's mature. And then they screen those and we start filtering out. And then we say what we're going to incentivize against that. So I think that's a different model, but a similar ideal way to use government incentives to try to accelerate and foster some of these smaller firms to improve our acquisitions process. I mean, some people would argue that it's not really that, it's some funding. And the bottom line is the defense industrial base is not where it needs to be for, strategic competition right now. So it's one of those things that incentivizing these smaller startups, to bring their products forth, validate them, and then scale them. That's the regular. Then we have to, you got to come at scale, especially if you're using AI, edge compute type stuff. You got to be able to show us over multiple prototypes, not just singular, and then show us how you can improve it and where you can expand it. And do you have the supply chain? Going back to that, it's all interconnected. The supply chain to support being able for the U.S. DoD to say, yes, this makes sense for a long-term investment and developing iterations of that. So that's one of the I think the last thing, and going back to the modular open systems architecture, is that's going to be key. You got to bring your thing to bear, but you got to make sure it works with the network, because the command and control aspect of any military operation is the key. If you can take out someone's eyes and sever the communications link, then you can drastically impact their way to compete on the battlefield. You can't bring a product that can't prove that it can't plug into everything else. And that's a real challenge for us with so many vendors, so many things. And we're going through this process right now through the replicators, et cetera, of new firms, new products, new this. Yeah, great. As long as we can adapt them into our overall hierarchy of communications, command and control, I think we can work with them. And I'd say the last thing is the same thing that goes with the Koreans, right? So maybe not the same, but once we allow all these companies in, and it goes to the classifications topic kind of Alex touched on, and we say, we'll buy your stuff, we have to make it easier for them to make money too. Like, and I don't mean easier in a haphazard way, but we have to be able to let them market their products overseas, like the Koreans do in the Middle East or wherever. They have to be able to make money. So yeah, we're going to help on the front side. But if you're not talking about dual use technologies where they can have a commercial side of what they're making for us, we have that monopoly. We can control what we're buying. We have to allow them some other revenue stream. They're just not going to survive. And then, they're very vulnerable to disruptors coming in and say, hey, we like your product. We've made it a little bit better. And now what happens when you lose your product and you've leveraged your whole business trying to support the DoD? So letting them make that money to continue for themselves to innovate and survive is one of those, I think, key facets to that as well. So that's a lot. But when we talk about recommendations, they're all connected, and there's really nothing very simple about it all.
Yeah, those are great points. So do either of you have any final thoughts? Maybe something we haven't covered yet?
I think final thoughts, I think it's, we come at attack it from a defense aspect. And I think there are a lot of ways that commercially we can use this. So I know that the academic government kind of defense iron triangle, if you will, is kind of weakened since World War II. And I think there's a lot of good ideas coming out of academia. It's just a matter of fostering those. So I think those grants and things for our universities are very important to keep going, because we visited with some MIT folks, some other folks that have some absolutely mind-blowing ideas, not just for autonomous systems, but in general. And they're at the point in their lives where they're really wanting to make a difference, and they're using a lot of brain power. Some stuff that was just, for me, awe-inspiring, that they're putting their effort into this stuff in graduate school. And you're like, wow, this is, how in the world would you ever come up with this? And so I think continue to make sure that we don't lose those incentives and those grants funding for our universities, because that was a key back in the 50s with the atomic bomb, if you will, and a lot of other things came out of non-military wearing, civilian clothes wearing folks. And if we lose that and we allow just the industry and the greater DC area here with the defense contractors to, I think we're cutting off a lot of the innovation, and we're getting them to do it at relatively inexpensive costs at that level. If you wait 10 years until they put on a suit and are working for the company, you're going to pay exponentially more for it. So I think that's, I don't know if that makes sense, but that to me is a key aspect of what we've done in the past that we can go back to and go, oh yeah, that worked for us. Let's make sure we're doing that.
Create better relationships and sharing agreements, both internally, as Shannon said, with these think tanks and universities, and so that they're working for the DoD in a partnership type of relationship, but also with our allies and our partners. Resources from now on are always going to be limited. We're just not going to be able to produce everything that we need or want to. So by combining assets and sharing this intelligence, the advancements in AS&R, which is just rapidly accelerating in that specific space, I think that will ultimately increase our capacity here needed to face these future defense challenges.
Well, that's great. It's been a really great conversation. And thank you both so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Kellogg. Appreciate being here.
Thank you.
So I hope you enjoyed this interview. I hope you found it enlightening.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a great, wide-ranging conversation. I think in particular when you're talking about comparing South Korea and the U.S. and kind of their different industrial systems and approaches to the defense industry was really interesting, like contrasting kind of the strengths and weaknesses of both.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. I thought because so many people are concerned that the use of robotics in particular humans will not be needed anymore, or it will totally destroy whole industries. And I think that has to be tempered a lot. I would push back a little bit on what Alex had said, that, well, people will just shift jobs because you're just going to need a lot less people to maintain the robotics. But, there's the capital needed to invest in it. And there's, right now, at least, it's being targeted on jobs that people don't want to do. There's huge shortages in many of these sort of, particularly the dirtier work in manufacturing. And there's a necessity. Companies are willing to invest capital in robots where they just can't even get people. And one thing that we didn't talk about in the conversation, but was interesting, is there's a problem with not having enough truck drivers, right? There's a huge shortage. And how there's this one company in Texas that is automating semis. And it's easier for them to do this than normal cars because you're basically just on the highway the whole time. And so they've done it all throughout Texas, apparently. And I thought that was just an interesting technology that's already out there. So it was really fascinating all year to talk to these people. And I just wanted to be able to share some of these insights. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Kellogg's Global Politics. You can visit our website at www.kelloggsglobalpolitics.com and follow us on X at Global Kellogg or me at AR Kellogg.
You can also reach us by email. So Anita at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com and myself, Ryan, at kellogg'sglobalpolitics.com. As always, please see the show notes for the articles we discussed in this episode.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.